In this video, I'm going to show you how to bake, fill, ice, and decorate this adorable Super Mario sheet cake. And just a reminder, all of the tools that I use and any videos that I reference will be linked in the description. So let's get started. To make the name, I googled Mario logo name maker and found this Super Mario text generator. So what you could do is scroll down and just replace that Marco name with the name that you need on your cake. And I wanted to make it a little bigger, so I used that zoom button and just slid that over to the right. I'm going to take a screenshot. So I hit Command Shift and 4 and I'm making a screenshot of that, and that is now saved to my computer. So I'm going to open a blank Word document and go to Insert Picture from File, and I am inserting that screenshot that I just took, and I'm making sure that it is the correct size. So I'm using the rulers that are at the very top. If you can't see the ruler, click on View and make sure that box is checked next to Ruler. But then I'm going to print this so I can use it on my cake. So I'm getting a thin layer of my pan grease all inside this half sheet cake pan. This is an old one that I got from Wilton. I can link it below. And then I also get some pan grease on these heating core nails, and I put 2 nails in there. And I cut a kitchen towel in 4-inch wide strips, and I just clipped them together. So I soaked that in water and I squeezed out the excess water, and then I wrap these wet strips around the outer edge, and then where it meets, I just clip it together. These are metal clips. They're not going to melt in the oven. They're all made of metal. And now I just want to pour in this cake batter. This is 1 2/3 of my recipe of the chocolate cake that can fit into a half sheet pan. And I just want to tap it on the countertop to remove the air bubbles. And I like to pour 1 cup of water in each of these cookie sheets that I keep on the bottom rack. It's going to steam bake this cake and help keep it moist. So I'm going to bake it at 340 for about 50 minutes and then check on it. You could bake it anywhere between 325 and 350. And after about 50 minutes, it's almost done, but I just want to remove this towel strip and rotate it, and then just put it back in for another 10 minutes or so and check on it again. And I have my little cake tester, and I'm just poking all over the place, and it's coming out clean. So it's done. I'm going to remove it and set it on top of the stove to cool for about 20 minutes before I wrap it in plastic wrap. So that's food safe plastic wrap. You turn it upside down and it releases easily because of that pan grease. And I'm lightly wrapping this up. Don't wrap it too hard. You don't want to distort it. And I'm storing it upside down in the freezer overnight. And the next day I let it thaw for about 4 hours so it can completely thaw. And I'm unwrapping it, and I got a half sheet cake board underneath, and I'm going to flip it over so I can easily peel this plastic wrap away. And I like to cut the edges. Sometimes my cakes bake over the top of the pan, and I just cut the edges off. It just makes it a little easier for me to tort this cake. And I have a Wilton cake leveler. This will be linked in the description, and I have it set on almost the highest setting, and it's really close to the top, so I'm not shaving too much of this off. So I turned it around to make it a little easier, and I'm just leveling off this very top part of the cake. And then I'm going to remove all of this extra cake, and then you can make cake balls out of this. Just set that aside, mix it with some icing or whatever you like to do. And then I set that wire on that leveler down lower so I can tort this cake in half. And I'm just going side by side really slowly so I don't mess up this cake. And I want to get a little bit of icing down on that half sheet cake board, and I'm spraying this lightly with some of that simple syrup. It's already really moist from steam baking it, but I always spray it a little bit. And then I'm sliding a half sheet cake board underneath to help this so I can easily move it. And then I'm spraying this bottom layer with some of that simple syrup. Again, just a light spraying. And then usually that slides off of there, but that cake was sticking to the board, so I had to lift it up and then put it down. I want to try to center it on here, making sure that it is even on the sides so it's center on the cake board. And then I'm filling this, so I have my chocolate buttercream. I will link this the video on how I make it in the description, but I'm just spreading this evenly, and I want to make sure that there's an even layer here so that it's not too thick in the middle and thin on the edges. So I'm just close attention to how thin I'm spreading this. So these are thinner layers of cake, so I'm not doing a really thick layer of filling on here, but just trying to make sure that it is nice and even and uniform throughout. And then I'm going to put this top layer on. So again, I lifted it off of that cake board just because it's a little moist, so it was sticking. I just want to make sure that it is perfectly on top there. And then I'm taking some of this chocolate filling and just patching the seams. And then I'm just going to rewrap it in that plastic that was on there before. And I'm going to set this aside for a couple hours just so it can settle. And then after it's settled, I'm just going to remove the plastic wrap and get a thin crumb coat of icing on here. So I have my American buttercream, and I'm just working in small sections and doing a little bit at a time and really making sure that I'm pressing this against the side of the cake because I don't want any air bubbles forming behind it. And when I do this, I want to try to make sure that this icing is coming up above the top of the cake so I can level it off. And again, I'm just filling in the very top of the cake as well, making sure that all of this cake is covered with the icing. And then we got to smooth it out. So I'm dipping my bench scraper in a pot of hot water to heat up that metal. And I'm going to wipe that off with a paper towel so it's dry and just scraping off this excess icing to smooth it out. And then I'm going to take my spatula and press that icing that's hanging over the very top, press that back. It does not have to be perfect. This is just a crumb coat. We're just trying to seal this. And then I'm going to put this back in the refrigerator for about 4 hours so that crumb coat can solidify before I add the final coat of icing. So that was in the fridge for 4 hours, and I have some light blue icing here. That's American buttercream again. And I'm really making sure that I'm doing an even thickness of icing around this whole thing. I don't want too much icing around the sides and on the top. However, when I'm doing this process, I do scrape a lot of it off. So it might look like I'm putting a crap ton of icing on here, but a lot of it is going to come off through the scraping process and the smoothing process. So you just want to make sure that the icing, like I said before, is coming over the very top of the cake. That way I'm able to level it off. So once that's all on there, I'm going to dip my bench scraper back in that hot pot of water again and then wipe it off with a paper towel. And then I want to make sure that I'm holding it as vertical as possible because I want it to be straight on the sides, and I'm doing the same process. Now, I'm not trying to get square corners here. She wanted a really simple design, and getting square corners on a sheet cake takes a lot of time, so I'm not taking all the time to do that right now, and it's okay. It still looks good without it. I'm removing a lot of that excess icing that was sticking over the top just because it was a little bit too much. Now I'm using my Viva paper towel and smoothing this out, so I always put it against the side of the cake, use my fingers to try to remove some of those imperfections in the icing from when I use the bench scraper, and then after I use my fingers, I like to take my fondant smoother and press that against the cake. Now I'm trying to flatten those sides as I'm pressing this against the cake. So it's trying to make the cake look a little bit more symmetrical and even when I'm using the fondant smoother. And now I'm dipping my spatula in that hot water and pressing this icing back to get an even edge on the top. And I have tons of videos where I go into detail on how I ice a smooth buttercream cake, and I'm going to link that in the description. But it's pretty much the same process, except this is on a sheet cake instead of a round cake, and I feel like round cakes are much easier anyway. I'm going to put that back in the fridge for about 10 minutes so that icing can solidify, and then I'm using my butcher paper to really smooth out the sides of this cake, kind of pressing it in with a little bit of pressure so those sides can be nice and vertical and even. And then I'm refining this top edge again with that spatula, trying to get a really sharp edge, and I keep dipping my spatula back in the hot water to clean it off, but I'm just eye level with the cake and making sure that this icing is nice and sharp and crisp and even. And then once that's done, I want to try to make sure that there's no hump in the middle because it tends to have like more icing in the middle. So I'm trying to scrape this icing back to make sure that the top of the cake is perfectly flat. And then once that's done, I'm dipping my spatula in hot water, dripping some hot water on top of the cake and using the water to smooth out that icing. Now, when you do this, don't let that hot water sit in one spot for too long because it's going to discolor the cake. So I drop it on there and immediately start to spread it out. That way you're not going to get any discoloration in the icing. You want to make sure that you don't go too close to the edges because you don't want the water to drip down the side. Trust me, it's happened to me so many times and it's so annoying because then you get a watermark. And then once I have it smooth on the top, then I'm going to start from the outer edges of the cake and keep dipping my spatula in the hot water and pushing it in. That way I'm able to really smooth out the edges of the cake as well. And this hot water technique, it just really smooths out the icing and makes it look really nice and perfect. And that looks really good. Let's put this back in the refrigerator overnight, and then I will start to decorate it. And now I want to make the brick blocks and border. So I'm rolling this brown fondant out. You can see how thin it is. It's always mixed with Tylose powder. I only use marshmallow fondant, mix some Tylose powder in there. It's going to make it a lot easier to work with. I have this brick impression mat. I don't love this mat. The impression is really shallow, so I have to really press it down there onto the fondant, and then it sticks as I'm peeling it off. It's kind of annoying. I really should get another one, but I can find similar ones and link them in the description. And then I'm just continuing that pattern all the way down. And then I have my ribbon cutter, and I just want to make this like the right thickness, so the thickness of the blocks in the Mario game. And I'm just cutting a long strip, making sure that I'm using the lines in the brick as a guide. Use my rulers to straighten it out, and I did the same thing for that really long one. And then I'm turning my ribbon cutter the other way, and I'm cutting a bunch of blocks, and I just like to take my fingers and smooth the edges because they're a little bit jagged. I just want to make sure they look nice and pretty. And then I'm getting my cake out of the refrigerator so that icing is really cold and hard. I'm not going to mess it up. I'm getting a wet paper towel and just cleaning all of that excess icing off of the cake board. And then I'm just going to lay this piece of fondant on top, cut the excess off. I have some piping gel, and I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to just get some piping gel all down on that very bottom part of the cake and lay this on top. And I'm using my fingers to make sure that I can get this nice and straight. And then I'm cutting it because the edges of my cake are rounded. I'm taking my scissors and just cutting this so it contours to the shape of the cake. Now I want to make the hills, so I rolled out this green fondant really thin. I'm cutting a straight edge on the bottom, and I'm using my little wheel cutter to cut hills in here. So I cut one hill, and then I'm cutting another hill that kind of bumps up to that other one, and then I cut a third one. And I'm using my fingers and just smoothing the edges. Like I said, anytime you cut anything out of fondant, it's going to be jagged. You want to smooth it out. And before I glue it down, I go over to my cake and I just put it down on the cake to make sure that it fits. And I feel like some of these look a little too big, so I just want to trim them a little bit. So I'm just taking my pizza cutter and trimming it down. That way it's not too big. So this is why I don't like to glue them down right away. I like to make sure that I get these in the correct position, and then I will glue them down. Now I rolled out this brown fondant. It does have that Tylose powder mixed into it. I have a square plunger cutter. I will link that in the description. I'm cutting a bunch of squares, and then I want to cut the pipes. So I have some darker green fondant here, and I use my ribbon cutter to cut the pipe part. And then for the part that goes on top of the pipe, it's a little thinner. So I'm just cutting a really long strip, and then I'm going to put it on top of those pipes. And the top of the pipe is a little bit wider than the pipe itself. If you look at the game, you could just see it. And I'm just cutting those to size, and then cutting them a little shorter. They were a little too tall. So let's go back over to my cake, and I'm putting them down on the cake first to make sure that they fit and they look right. And then I'll get a little bit of piping gel or water behind it and stick it down. I wanted the pipe to meet that brown part of the fondant, so I'm pressing the fondant that's behind it down a little bit so it can sit flush. And technically, I could have cut the hills out and made that pipe flush, but again, this was a simpler design. I didn't want to spend too much time working on this. Now I'm getting a little bit of water or piping gel underneath where I'm sticking all of these blocks, and I did a row of 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1, and I'm going to stick that back in the refrigerator. Now I'm rolling out some white fondant. You can see how really thin it is, and I printed these edible images. I will link that in the description for you. And I want to cut each of these out individually. If you have a Cricut, have at it. I don't love how Cricuts cut these out. I feel like I get a cleaner cut when I do it myself, so I just prefer to do it myself. And what I like to do is cut an even white border around all of these edible images. I just feel like the white border makes it look cleaner and neater and more professional. I have a video showing you how I use edible images and how I print them and cut them out, and I will link that below. Then I get a little bit of piping gel. I flip the image upside down on a paper towel and make sure that I'm wiping that piping gel past the edge of the image so I can get all of these edges. You need the edges to stick down to this fondant, and then I'm pressing it down, making sure it is completely adhered to that fondant, and doing the same thing for all these pieces, going past that image onto the paper towel with the piping gel to make sure that
that the edges are going to stick. And then I want to cut these out, so I'm just using that white border as a guide and my X-Acto knife and cutting these out. And anytime you cut anything out of fondant, you need to take your tools and your fingers and just smooth those edges because everything is a little bit jagged. And here are all of the little edible images that I cut out. I'm going to set those aside, and then I'm getting my cake out of the refrigerator, and I printed all of these out on my regular printer first and arranged them on the cake to kind of get an idea of where I wanted to put everything. And now I'm just going to remove the images and then place the edible images down in their place. So again, I'm not gluing these down. I just want to put these on the cake first to make sure that I can get everything in the right position. And then I had some of those extra blocks here, and I'm just trying to make it look like the game and arrange everything so it fits best on the cake. And now I'm going to get some piping gel behind all of these pieces and stick them down. You can also use water, you can use icing, whatever you want to use to stick this to the top of the cake. But I just want to make sure that it's center. So I grabbed my ruler and just measured from the edge to that image to make sure that it was center. And then I'm just going to glue everything down. And now I'm going to do a grass border. I have a grass tip with some green icing, and this is a forearm workout, and I'm just squeezing all this grass all the way around here. And for the final touch, I want to get some non-toxic glue all around the outside of that cake board and on the back of this red ribbon, and then wrap that ribbon around the cake where it meets in the back. Just get a little bit more glue down and stick that down. And here is the Super Mario sheet cake. How cute is that?
So there you go. How adorable. Oh God. So there you go. How adorable is this cake? Now I have to say, I do not love making sheet cakes. The reason being, I feel like icing a round cake is so much easier. And I think people have it in their heads that sheet cakes should be cheaper because they're easier. And a custom sheet cake does not equal a grocery store sheet cake. Like, it takes a long time to ice it. It takes a while to decorate, and they are definitely not comparable. I think people order sheet cakes to try to keep the price down, but I think I'm just going to stick with round cakes from now on. It's just a pain in the butt, and I don't feel like dealing with it. But you saw this cake is a 1-layer torted half sheet cake, and it feeds about 25 to 35 people. So I think that's it. What new techniques did you learn in this video? I would love to know. Leave it in the comments below. And just a reminder, I have ebooks with all of my recipes. I have my signature scratch pound cake recipes, my best doctored cake mix recipes, my favorite buttercream icing and filling recipes, along with my favorite numbers and my favorite fonts. So they will all be linked in the description. And I do have a KakeAcademy membership program where I can help you elevate your cakes to the next level. All of that information is in the description. Please like this video if you liked it, and if you're enjoying my tutorials, I would be so grateful if you could buy me a coffee. My link is down below. And I would love it if you would keep in touch on socials, and you can check out my website. And if you want to stick around, you can watch this video next, and hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys. And remember, it's cake. Have fun. I will see you on the next one. Bye.